This is the Kia EV6 GT, the high-performance version of Kia's best electric car. And when I say high performance, I do mean high performance. This car makes 585 horsepower, 740 newton meters of torque, and I think that should make for some pretty alarming acceleration. How alarming? Let's find out. Right, power on, drive mode selected, foot on brake, big green button, accelerate, pray. Oh, yep. Yeah, I'm alarmed. My God. Okay, so that's impressive for a few reasons. First of all, because it's a Kia. Secondly, because it's pulling harder than an Aston Martin DB12. It's quicker to 60 than a Ferrari 458 Italia, for goodness sake. Wow.
In fact, if we're comparing it to other electric cars, it's still impressive. Its official 0 to 62 time is quicker than the Audi RS e-tron GT. It'll leave a Porsche Taycan Sport Turismo for dead. But maybe that's not so surprising, given the price.
The entry-level Kia EV6 costs £45,000. A really high-spec GT line model will set you back £57,000. Guess the price of this? 62 grand for a Kia. World's gone mad. Maybe I shouldn't act so surprised because the price of everything is sky high right now. But I had a look on Auto Trader and get this, you can actually buy a Porsche Taycan, a couple of years old, 20,000 miles on the clock, for the same price as one of these. Food for thought.
What do you get for your cash? Visually, there aren't that many changes. The front bumper detail has been very slightly redesigned. You now have a very fetching set of 21-inch wheels behind which are bigger brakes front and rear, and these very fetching acid green brake calipers. There are 5 color options including white, grey, red, blue and this midnight black, while at the rear you get a high-level spoiler for a bit of aero and a new lower bumper and rear diffuser.
What's it like on the inside of the EV6 GT? Well, a lot like the normal EV6 to be honest, but that's no bad thing because the cabin is quite nice. The major difference is the splash of color you now get. So you get this lime green stitching around the inside of the steering wheel, a nice big lime green GT button which unleashes the full fury of the car, and lime green piping and stitching on these new sport seats, which look quite fetching, don't they? They've got suede in the middle, the green stitching, and also a GT badge with some chrome detailing in the back. Nice touch. They also give you a lot more support in the corners than your standard seats, but not where it concerns your neck. In the standard car, you get quite a lot of neck support, but in this, when you accelerate, your head goes flying back pretty much all the time, so that's something to bear in mind. Also worth bearing in mind is the fact that these side bolsters down here really do dig into your thighs, especially on your accelerator leg, and after a while, that can get quite annoying. But it's not as annoying as the fact that these seats don't have electric adjustment. No, if I want to adjust them, I've got to move it back and forth by myself. £62,000 and I don't have electrical adjustment. I guess the one good thing is that when you're charging up and you've got a few moments to kill, you can actually recline these seats really quickly, which is, I don't know, slightly better than waiting for the motor to do it, but come on, 62 grand, I need electrically adjustable seats, people. Right, elsewhere I've got 2 cup holders down here, wireless phone charger that fits my large iPhone perfectly, a lot of storage space in this central binnacle, and a ton of USB ports. I've got Type C and Type A down there, plus more storage down the bottom. Large door bins lined in felt so your spare change and your keys aren't jangling all over the place, and a pretty big glove box as well. As for technology, huge head-up display in front of me showing me my speed and my maps and my media playback. That's nice. And nice big screens for your infotainment and your driver display. Generally, this infotainment system is pretty responsive and the maps do what they're supposed to do. The one thing that kind of annoys me about this, and I don't like this in electric cars, is when it shows you your nearby chargers, it doesn't actually show you how fast those chargers are. So, for example, if I search for a nearby charger in this, what you'll see is it comes up with a list of chargers that are either AC or DC. DC are the rapid chargers, they're the ones you want, but it doesn't show you how fast those rapid chargers actually are. So you end up having to look on your phone anyway. Another annoying thing, this lower panel down here is very confusing, especially when you're driving at the same time as using it, particularly these buttons on the outer edges. Now on the left hand side, by default, this one controls your volume, and this one on the right hand side, I'm not sure what it does. It seems to do different things at different times. So for example, if I'm in the maps, it'll control my zooming, but if I'm in the radio, this knob controls my radio station. And then if I press this fan button, it starts to control my temperature. And then you can swap the functions around. So that can become your volume knob, and that can become your temperature knob at different times, depending on what you're doing. It's just difficult to wrap your head around. And finally, the heating system is a pain in the backside, because if you actually set a temperature using these knobs, it doesn't actually turn the heating on. If you want heat, you got to press the heat button after setting the temperature. Why?
In the back, meanwhile, it's very similar to the standard EV6 but with sportier seats, though there is still good leg and headroom. The back has 2 USB ports along with a 3-pin electrical outlet, handy for charging laptops, etc., and fold-down armrests with cup holders. The boot, meanwhile, is adequate at 480 litres, though it's slightly smaller than the 490 litres you get in the model below, due to the GT having a larger rear motor. Storage in the front trunk is fairly disappointing at 20 litres, but it's a decent space to keep your charge cables.
So what's it like to drive? Let me give you my first impressions. It feels like a Kia EV6, obviously, but slightly worse. And that's because the suspension has been tuned for sportiness. It's a very firm car. I know you should expect that, but I've got to say it.
There are a few driving modes. You get Eco, Normal and Sport with this button, and then GT mode with the big yellow button. In Eco and Normal, it's perfectly livable, but in Sport and GT, it's too hard for daily use. Although there is the My Drive mode that lets you have a customized mixture of your favorite settings.
And it's not just the suspension. This car's running Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tyres, and they're quite low profile compared to the standard tyres, so there's a lot less rubber to soak up the bumps in the road. And you do feel it. There is a slight irony in the fact that GT mode, which is the entire point of this car, makes the EV6 GT feel really on edge. Everything from the suspension to the acceleration is very immediate, very, very focused, very, very sharp, maybe a little bit too sharp. And you know what? I'm going to sound a bit like an old man again, but these seats, yeah, comfort is fine, support is fine, but once again, this bolster on my right hand side under my thigh is just digging into my leg. It's not the most comfortable car to drive. What's it like when you go into a corner? In the stiffest suspension mode, GT, because it's so firm, you expect there's not going to be any body roll, but there actually is. So you get this really unusual situation where you get a very jiggly ride on the straight, and then in the corners you don't get the benefit of a totally flat cornering experience. It's quite odd. And then when you accelerate out of a bend, in GT mode, you sometimes feel the front wheels spin up. It almost feels as if there were enough space and enough commitment, you could go into something of a bit of a 4-wheel drift, which might be fun if you had a lot of space to play with. But on the public roads, I think I'd prefer if the car sent more of its power to the rear, because it's just a little bit disconcerting feeling those front wheels spin up. I also find it a bit difficult to predict what's going to happen mid-corner, because sometimes you actually feel a bit of understeer and then sometimes you feel oversteer, so it's difficult to gauge exactly what the car's going to be doing at any given moment. What are the brakes like? Yeah, they're actually pretty good. They slow the car down pretty nicely, which is just as well because this is a 2.1 ton car. It's around 100 kilograms heavier than the standard EV6, and I'm actually quite impressed by that. I'm also reasonably impressed with the amount of feedback you get in the steering. I do know where the grip levels are about to run out, which is quite handy. You don't want to drive this car anywhere near its limits, because when the grip levels run out, you've still got that weight and mass to deal with in the bends, and at that point, things can get a little bit, shall we say, scary. Fair play to this thing. It's a rocket in a straight line. The brakes work well. In the corners, it's doing what it's supposed to do. It's hanging on in there. Am I having fun? I'm not 100% sure I am. And I think that's part of the problem.
The power is certainly eye-opening. 585 PS and 740 Newton meters is alarmingly fast, but it really is a trick you're unlikely to repeat very often simply because of how violent and sudden and frankly unnecessary that level of performance often is in a family car. Luckily, there are other toys on the EV6 GT that might entertain you. Like the Ioniq 5, its sister car, the GT benefits from vehicle to load, aka V2L, which means you can use it to power other electrical devices, handy for camping or during a power cut. Also, the car can drive itself, kinda. It has a pretty decent remote control mode that lets you pull it out of really tight spaces using the key without you having to be inside the cabin. It's less effective at going back into a space due to the very conservative collision sensor, but the good news is it won't run you over.
So what's it like when you're not trying to deplete the battery as quickly as humanly possible? Well, let's talk about the range. It has a 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack, so no bigger than the standard car. And they say it'll do 263 miles on a charge, which works out to be an average of 3.3 miles per kilowatt hour. And I've not been achieving anywhere near that today. I'm averaging around 2.2, but my driving has been a little bit on the sporty side, shall we say. However, I do think 3.3 is theoretically possible if you go light on the accelerator pedal.
As for recharging, Kia say the EV6 GT will charge at up to 233 kilowatts. So if you can find a charger that supplies that, it'll go from 10 to 80% in just 18 minutes.
As a daily driver, I think it's a car you can live with quite reasonably on a day-to-day basis. One thing I've noticed though is that the turning circle isn't as good as it could be. It's certainly not a bust to drive, but when you're trying to maneuver in really tight situations, it might take a 5-point turn instead of a 3-point turn to spin around. It's a bit of an odd car, this. The Kia EV6 GT should be a car that I love. It makes sense on paper. It ticks so many boxes. The standard EV6 is a car that I recommend with no hesitation whatsoever. And this thing should be even more desirable. It's got more power, better acceleration, it corners better, it's got really cool green brake calipers. But for some reason, I'm left slightly cold by the experience.
Maybe it's the fact it's not as fun in the corners as it is when accelerating down the straights, and its speed on the straights is, quite frankly, a bit unnecessary. With that being said, I'm still not convinced it's worth the extra money over the standard model.